Hey, what is up, everyone? Today we got a pretty unique story. It's narrated by Frederick Surrey. Get cozy and watch till the end, guys.
There exists, in the grim darkness of the far future, a species that knows neither peace nor mercy. They are not driven by noble causes or desperate survival. They do not build empires to preserve their legacy or wage war to defend their homes. They fight because fighting is all they know, all they are, and all they will ever be. They are the orcs, and to understand their existence is to glimpse a life so brutal, so violent, so utterly alien to human comprehension that it becomes a kind of terrible poetry written in blood and destruction across the stars. This is the story of what it means to be an orc. Not the legends of great war bosses who shake planets with their fury, but the everyday experience of a single greenskin from the moment fungal spores give birth to consciousness, to the inevitable moment when that same warrior falls in glorious battle, releasing more spores to begin the cycle anew. It is a life measured not in years of peace or moments of quiet contemplation, but in the thunder of gunfire, the clash of crude blades, and the endless, primal joy of a species that exists only to wage war. The strange birth of violence. Long before the first breath, before the first thought, before even the concept of self takes root in what will become an orc's consciousness, there is the spore. Microscopic, resilient beyond measure, and carrying within its fungal structure the complete genetic blueprint for an entire ecosystem, this spore drifts on alien winds or settles into foreign soil, waiting for the conditions that will trigger its strange transformation. The spores come from death, every orc, throughout its violent existence, constantly releases these microscopic seeds of future warfare. They shed from skin like invisible dust. They float away on every exhalation. They pour forth in enormous quantities from every wound. But it is in death that the true deluge comes. When an orc falls in battle, when its massive green body finally yields to damage that even its remarkable constitution cannot overcome, it releases millions upon millions of spores in a final act of biological defiance. The warrior may have been defeated, but the war continues. The spores will ensure it. These spores, once they find purchase in soil, or settle into the cracks of ruined buildings, or nestle into the debris of demolished fortifications, begin their transformation. They burrow deep, seeking darkness and moisture, finding their way through layers of earth and stone until they rest in conditions suitable for what comes next. There, in the hidden places beneath the surface of 1,000 conquered worlds, the spores begin to grow. What emerges first is not the orc itself, but rather the foundation of the entire orcoid ecosystem. The spores differentiate, following genetic programming laid down millions of years ago by the mysterious Old Ones who first engineered this terrible species. Some become the fungal growths that will provide food and medicine. Others transform into the small, ambulatory mushrooms, known as squigs, creatures of pure appetite and aggression that serve as both livestock and ammunition for the greenskins. Still others develop into snotlings, the smallest and least intelligent of the orcoid subspecies. Barely sentient creatures whose only purpose is to tend the fungal farms that sustain their larger cousins. Then come the Gretchen, known more commonly as grots. These are the first truly intelligent members of the ecosystem to emerge, standing roughly half the height of a human, with the characteristic green skin and pointed ears of their kind, but lacking the raw physical power that defines the orcs themselves. The Gretchen are crafty, cunning in their own limited way, and perfectly suited to the role they will play in the society that is even now taking shape beneath the ground. They begin immediately to organize, to build crude shelters, to establish the infrastructure that will support what is coming next. Finally, after weeks or sometimes months of gestation in the underground chambers formed by the growing fungal mass, the first true orcs emerge. They do not crawl from wombs or break free from eggs. Instead, they simply pull themselves out of the fungal growth that has nourished their development, already standing upright, already possessing basic motor skills and the instinctive knowledge that their species was engineered to carry in their very genes. These newly emerged orcs, called youths in the crude language of the greenskins, are not infants in any traditional sense. They stand perhaps 5 or 6 feet tall already, their muscles dense and powerful, despite never having been used. Their minds, while simple, contain certain fundamental knowledge hard-coded into their genetic structure. They know how to speak the guttural orcish tongue. They understand basic concepts of hierarchy and violence. They possess an instinctive grasp of mechanical principles that would take a human years of education to acquire. Most importantly, they know what they are meant to do. They are meant to fight. The first moments of an orc's life are chaotic and primal. The youth emerges from the fungal mass confused, but not afraid. For fear is an emotion that orcs process differently than most species. It sees other orcs around it, some also newly emerged, others older and larger, veterans of the battles that have raged on the surface, while this new generation gestated below. It smells the distinctive odor of fungus and gunsmoke and orc sweat. It hears the constant din of greenskin society, the shouting and fighting and crude laughter that never truly ceases wherever orcs gather. And then comes the first test. Because in orc society, there is no gentle introduction to life, no period of nurturing or careful education. There is only the immediate and brutal establishment of where one stands in the hierarchy. An older orc, perhaps only a few months senior but already noticeably larger, spots the newly emerged youth. The challenge is immediate and instinctive. The older boy shoves the newcomer, perhaps throws a punch, testing this fresh addition to the mob. This is the moment that will define the youth's early existence. If it cowers, if it runs, it will be marked as weak, and will spend its days as little more than a slave to those stronger than itself. But if it fights back, if it meets violence with violence, even in these first confused moments of consciousness, it will earn a measure of respect. It will still be at the bottom of the hierarchy, but it will have shown that it has the fundamental quality that orc society values above all others, the willingness to fight. Most youths fight back. It is in their nature, coded into every strand of their fungal-animal hybrid biology. They swing crude fists, they bite and claw and headbutt. They fight with all the savage enthusiasm of a species born for warfare. They lose these first fights, usually, because they are smaller and less experienced. But they fight, and that is what matters. As the youth recovers from its first beating, sitting in the dirt of whatever crude encampment the warband has established, it begins to understand the world it has been born into. There is no moment of existential crisis, no questioning of purpose or meaning. An orc knows what it is meant to do with the same certainty that a fish knows it should swim. It is meant to grow bigger and stronger. It is meant to fight better and more frequently. It is meant to accumulate enough victories that other orcs will follow it into battle. And eventually, if it grows large enough and defeats enough rivals, it might become a war boss, leading its own tribe in an endless crusade of destruction across the galaxy. But that future, if it ever comes, is distant beyond imagining. For now, the youth has more immediate concerns. It needs to find weapons. It needs to prove itself worthy of a place in the warband. It needs to survive long enough to grow larger, because in orc society, size literally determines status, and size comes only through successful violence. The newly emerged orc looks around at its new world with eyes that see only opportunity for conflict. Every larger orc is a challenge to eventually overcome. Every weapon is a tool to make that overcoming possible. Every day is a chance to prove that it deserves to exist, to fight, to eventually grow into something more than just another youth at the bottom of the brutal hierarchy. This is the beginning. Not of life as most species would understand it, but of an existence defined entirely by violence, by the constant struggle for dominance, by the primal joy that orcs feel when engaged in combat. The youth does not know that it will never retire from warfare, never settle into peaceful old age, never build something lasting, or create something beautiful. It does not know these things because such concepts are entirely foreign to the orcoid mind. It knows only that somewhere on the surface there are battles to be fought, enemies to be crushed, and a place in the hierarchy to be claimed through force of arms. The spore has become an orc. The cycle of violence that defines the green-skinned species has claimed another warrior, and in doing so, it has ensured that the endless war will continue, that the green tide will surge across the stars, that civilizations will fall before the crude but overwhelming force that is orc warfare at its most fundamental level. Finding your place in the mob. The transition from newly emerged youth to established member of the warband is neither quick nor gentle. It is a period measured in constant trials, in daily fights for status and respect, in the brutal process of growing larger through violence and proving oneself worthy of better weapons, better position, and eventually, the grudging acknowledgement of the older boys and knobs who run the warband. The first challenge every youth faces is the same: survival in an environment where strength is the only currency that matters. Unlike human societies with their complex hierarchies based on birth, wealth, or education, orc society operates on a principle so simple that even the dimmest greenskin can understand it perfectly. The biggest and strongest orc is in charge, and every orc beneath that war boss is arranged in strict order according to their size and fighting prowess. There are no exceptions to this rule, no alternative paths to power, no way to advance except by growing larger and proving that growth through victorious combat. For the youth, this means that every day begins with violence, not the organized violence of war against other species, but the constant low-level aggression that defines orc social interaction. Older boys shove the youths aside when moving through the camp. Knobs kick them out of the way when they want to pass. Even Gretchen, those scrawny lesser cousins who occupy the very bottom of orcoid society, will sometimes try to boss around a newly emerged youth, though such attempts usually end with the grot getting punched hard enough to remember its place. The youth learns quickly that respect must be earned through fighting, but also that picking the wrong fights can end a career before it truly begins. Challenge someone too far above your weight class and you will be beaten so badly that you might never recover. Fail to defend yourself against your peers and you will be marked as weak, forever relegated to the lowest positions in the mob. The trick, such as it is, lies in finding opponents you can actually defeat while avoiding those who will simply crush you. This is where the first glimmers of what passes for orcish cunning begin to emerge. The youth learns to size up potential opponents, judging their scars and their swagger and their weapons. It learns to pick moments when larger orcs are distracted or tired from other fights. It learns the value of a good ambush, of catching an opponent off guard, of fighting dirty in ways that would shame a human warrior, but which orcs consider perfectly acceptable tactics. Between these constant scraps for status, the youth must also learn the practical skills of survival in the warband. It needs to acquire weapons, and since orcs rarely give anything away for free, this usually means either making crude implements yourself or taking them from someone else. Many youths begin their careers wielding nothing more than chunks of scrap metal sharpened on rocks, clubs fashioned from broken vehicle parts, or blades looted from the corpses of fallen enemies. The fungus that forms the basis of the orcoid diet is plentiful wherever orcs gather, tended by the snotlings who lack the intelligence for anything more complex. The youth learns which varieties are safe to eat, which produce the potent fungus beer that orcs favor, and which can be used for medicinal purposes when applied to wounds. It is a diet that would sicken or kill most species, but to an orc, whose hybrid biology includes significant fungal components, it provides adequate nutrition combined with a constant low-level intoxication that makes the brutal existence somehow more bearable. As weeks become months, the youth begins to change. This is where the true genius of the orc's engineered biology becomes apparent. Unlike most species, which reach a certain adult size and then stop growing, orcs continue to increase in mass and height throughout their lives, and this growth is directly tied to their success in combat. An orc that fights frequently and wins consistently will grow larger. This growth is not gradual or subtle. An orc that survives enough battles can double in size over the course of a year, its body packing on dense muscle, its bones thickening, its already formidable constitution becoming even more resilient. This biological feedback loop creates a self-reinforcing hierarchy. The orc that wins fights grows larger, which makes it easier to win future fights, which causes more growth, which establishes greater dominance. It is a system that ensures the strongest rise to positions of leadership, while the weak remain weak, serving the more powerful until they either die in battle or somehow manage to distinguish themselves enough to begin their own growth. The youth watches this process in the boys around it, seeing greenskins that emerged only months before already standing half a head taller, already sporting better weapons and armor, already bossing around those who have not grown as fast. It creates a hunger in the young orc, not for food, but for violence, for the opportunity to prove itself and trigger that precious growth that will elevate it above the constant humiliation of being the smallest, weakest member of the mob. Social structures begin to emerge among the youths as they organize themselves into small groups for mutual protection and enhanced fighting power. These are not friendships in any meaningful sense, for orcs lack the emotional depth for such bonds. They are alliances of convenience, temporary arrangements that last only as long as they benefit all parties. A group of youths might band together to take down a larger boy who has been bullying them, but the moment that threat is eliminated, they will just as readily turn on each other to establish who among them will take the fallen bully's place in the hierarchy. It is during this period that many youths discover which of the orc clans they naturally belong to. The clan system is one of the strange constants in orc society, a genetic and cultural framework that seems to transcend individual warbands. There are 6 major clans, each representing a different aspect of the orcish character, and every orc instinctively knows which one calls to their nature. Some youths find themselves drawn to the Goths, the brutal close combat specialists, who believe that the only proper way to fight is face to face with the biggest, loudest weapons they can find. These are the orcs who can't wait to get stuck into melee, who feel that shooting is merely a prelude to the real work of smashing enemies with powered claws and massive hammers. They favor black clothing and decorations, and they are universally regarded as the most aggressive of an already aggressive species. Others discover they have the soul of an evil sons, the speed-obsessed maniacs who believe passionately that red vehicles go faster and who would rather be racing toward the enemy on bikes and buggies than trudging forward on foot. These orcs gravitate toward the mech boys who maintain the warband's vehicles, learning the basics of keeping engines running and weapons firing while they wait for the day they can claim their own bike or buggy and join the wild charges that the evil sons are famous for. The bad moons reveal themselves through their obsession with wealth and status symbols. Their teeth grow faster than other orcs, a biological quirk that makes them rich by greenskin standards since teeth are the currency of orc society. They are the flashy, boastful members of the warband, always looking for ways to acquire better weapons, shinier armor, and more impressive gear to show off their status. Death Skulls are the looters and scavengers, the orcs who believe fervently that blue is a lucky color and who have an almost supernatural ability to find useful salvage in the wreckage of battle. They are often regarded with suspicion by other orcs because of their tendency to borrow anything not nailed down, but their skill at acquiring and repurposing equipment makes them valuable members of any warband. Snakebites are the traditionalists, the orcs who prefer the old ways of warfare, who shun advanced technology in favor of brutal close combat and the use of savage squig beasts. They are often found in feral orc tribes that have regressed to a more primitive state. But even in more advanced warbands, there are always a few orcs who feel the pull toward this simpler, more violent approach to warfare. Finally, there are the blood axes, the most unusual of all orc clans. These greenskins have actually learned from fighting humans and other species, adopting tactics like camouflage, coordinated attacks, and even the shocking practice of occasionally retreating from losing battles. Other orcs regard them with deep suspicion, considering them un-orky for their willingness to use cunning instead of pure brutality, but the blood axe's success in battle is undeniable. The youth does not consciously choose its clan. The affinity is genetic, part of the same biological programming that gives each orc its instinctive knowledge of language and mechanics. But as it grows and fights, and begins to establish its place in the warband, the youth finds itself naturally gravitating toward others who share its clan identity, adopting their colors and customs, learning their preferred fighting styles. Throughout all of this, the constant background noise of orc society continues unabated. The camp is never quiet. There are always fights breaking out as orcs test each other's strength. There is always the sound of mech boys hammering on vehicles and weapons. There is always the roar of engines being tested, the chatter of guns being fired at makeshift targets, the bellowing of knobs giving orders, and the grumbling of boys complaining about those orders even as they follow them. The youth learns to navigate this chaos, to understand the unwritten rules that govern orc behavior. It learns that while any orc can challenge any other orc to a fight, actually killing a fellow greenskin over minor disputes is frowned upon because it wastes warriors who could be fighting the enemy instead. It learns that stealing from a stronger orc is acceptable only if you don't get caught, but getting caught means a beating severe enough to make the theft not worth the attempt. It learns that the Gretchen are to be kicked and abused, but also protected from excessive harm, because they perform valuable services that the orcs themselves consider beneath their dignity. Months pass. The youth grows. Each successful fight, each victory over a rival, each battle against enemies of the warband contributes to its increasing size and status. What began as a confused, newly emerged greenskin gradually transforms into a proper orc boy, strong enough to hold its own in most fights, experienced enough to know when to press an advantage and when to back down, equipped with decent weapons scavenged or looted from various sources. But even as it achieves this transformation, the orc knows that this is just the beginning. Above it in the hierarchy are the truly massive knobs, the elite warriors who have survived countless battles and grown to enormous size. Above them are the war bosses, greenskins so large and powerful that even other orcs instinctively bow to their authority. And beyond even the war boss lies the possibility of something greater, the chance to lead a force so large and powerful that entire star systems tremble at its approach. The orc looks at these distant possibilities with something resembling ambition. Though the emotion is simpler and more violent than human aspiration, it wants to be bigger, it wants to be stronger, it wants to fight more and better, and with greater success until it towers over those who once looked down on it. This is the driving force of orc existence, the biological imperative that pushes them always toward greater violence, larger size, and more dominant positions in the hierarchy. For now, though, the newly established boy has found its place. It is no longer the weakest, no longer the newest, no longer at the very bottom of the social order. It has earned its spot in the mob through violence and cunning, through growth and survival, through the brutal process that turns fungal spores into warriors. It belongs to the warband. And the warband is preparing for something that makes every orc's blood sing with anticipation. Somewhere on the horizon, there is a proper fight coming. Not the small skirmishes and raids that the warband has been conducting to keep sharp and acquire supplies. Something bigger. Something that will test every warrior and offer the chance for glory and growth and the pure, terrible joy that orcs feel only in the chaos of true warfare. The boy can feel it building, can sense the anticipation in the air, as the warboss and his nobs make their plans. Soon, very soon, the warband will go to war, and when it does, every orc from the mightiest warboss to the lowest youth will surge forward together in a tide of green-skinned violence that will wash over their enemies like a force of nature. This is what the orc has been waiting for. This is what it was made for. The time of finding its place is over. The time of proving what that place is worth has arrived. The iron law of might makes right. The organization of orc society, if such a chaotic system can truly be called organized, rests on a foundation so simple and so brutal that it requires no written laws, no complex bureaucracy, no enforcement mechanism beyond the immediate application of violence. Every orc, from the moment it emerges from the fungal growth, understands the fundamental principle that governs every interaction, every decision, every relationship within greenskin culture. The biggest orc is in charge. This is not a metaphor or a generalization. It is literal truth. Size determines status with perfect accuracy. The warboss is the largest orc in the tribe. The nobs, who serve as his lieutenants, are smaller than him, but larger than the regular boys. The boys themselves arrange in strict hierarchy according to their height and bulk. Even among the youths, this principle holds, with the slightly larger and more developed greenskins naturally dominating their smaller peers. This biological hierarchy creates a society that functions with surprising efficiency, despite appearing utterly chaotic to outside observers. There is never any question about who is in charge. There are no debates about succession, no complex politics about who deserves what position. If you are bigger and stronger, you lead. If someone bigger and stronger comes along, they take over. It is brutally simple, and from the orc perspective, perfectly fair. The warboss sits at the apex of this hierarchy, a massive greenskin who has grown to enormous size through countless victories. A typical warboss stands 8 to 10 feet tall, with some of the largest specimens reaching 12 feet or more. Their bodies are mountains of muscle wrapped in thick green skin, scarred by hundreds of battles. They wear the best armor the warband's mech boys can produce, wield the most powerful weapons, and possess a presence that makes even other orcs instinctively defer to their authority. But the warboss's position is never truly secure. Any orc who grows large enough and strong enough can challenge for leadership, and such challenges are settled through single combat. The current warboss must either defeat the challenger, proving that size alone does not determine fitness to lead, or fall before the newcomer and either die or be reduced to a subordinate position if allowed to survive. This constant potential for violent succession might seem like a recipe for instability, but in practice, it ensures that only the most capable orcs lead, and that leadership is constantly tested against new contenders. Beneath the warboss are his nobs, the elite warrior class of orc society. These are greenskins who have proven themselves in countless battles, who have grown large through successful violence, and who serve as the warboss's enforcers and war leaders. Nobs typically stand 7 to 9 feet tall, smaller than the warboss, but still towering over regular boys. They wear heavy armor, often cobbled together from the best pieces of looted enemy war gear, and they carry weapons that would require 2 hands for a human, but which they wield with brutal efficiency. The relationship between a warboss and his nobs is not based on loyalty or affection, but on mutual benefit and carefully maintained respect. The nobs follow the warboss because he is strong enough to crush any of them individually and cunning enough to keep them from uniting against him. The warboss tolerates his nobs because they help him maintain control over the larger warband and lead smaller groups of boys into battle. It is a balance maintained through constant, low-level intimidation and the ever-present threat of violence. Nobs enjoy privileges that regular boys can only dream of. They eat first from whatever food is available. They claim the best weapons and armor from the spoils of battle. They have access to the pain boys for medical treatment when wounded, while regular boys must often make do with crude field medicine or simply tough out their injuries. They can kick and bully the boys beneath them with impunity, maintaining discipline through fear and the occasional brutal example of what happens to those who question authority. Below the knobs come the vast majority of orcs, the regular boys, who make up the bulk of any warband. These greenskins range in size from 5 to 7 feet tall, though the more successful ones grow larger over time and may eventually reach the size where they can claim nob status themselves. The boys are the warriors, the fighters, the overwhelming green tide that crashes over enemy positions in wave after wave of savage violence. The boys organize themselves into mobs, groups of orcs who fight together and share a rough camaraderie born from mutual combat experience. These mobs are not military units in any formal sense. They have no set size, no standard equipment, no official designation. They are simply collections of orcs who have decided, at least temporarily, to fight alongside each other. Membership is fluid, with boys joining or leaving mobs based on which group seems most successful or which war boss seems most likely to lead them to good fights. Within each mob, the same hierarchical principles apply. The largest boy is the mob boss, responsible for leading the group into battle and making whatever tactical decisions pass for planning among orcs. The other boys follow him not out of any sense of duty, but because he is big enough to beat them if they don't. And because following a successful mob boss offers opportunities for personal glory and growth. The boys spend their days in constant competition with each other. When not actually fighting enemies, they fight each other, not to the death, but in brutal matches that establish pecking order and settle disputes. They gamble with teeth, the currency of orc society, betting on these fights or on various contests of strength and skill. They boast endlessly about their past victories and their future plans, each trying to establish themselves as more impressive than their fellows. They maintain their weapons and armor, work odd jobs for the mech boys or pain boys to earn teeth for upgrades, and generally engage in the sort of aggressive, violent behavior that humans would consider criminal, but which orcs simply think of as normal social interaction.
You know, I've spent hundreds of hours reading Warhammer lore, and honestly, the orcs might be the most fascinating faction precisely because they're so simple. Every other species in this universe is tortured by their circumstances. The Imperium drowning in dogma, the Elder haunted by their fall, the Tau naive about the galaxy's true horrors. But the orcs, they're just happy, genuinely, authentically happy, doing exactly what they were made to do. There's something almost envious about that, isn't there? No existential crisis, no questioning their purpose, no despair about the state of the galaxy, just pure and complicated joys and violence. It's horrifying and weirdly beautiful at the same time. But anyway, let's continue.
Running through all levels of this hierarchy are the odd boys, orcs, who possess specialized knowledge and skills that set them apart from the regular warriors. These greenskins are not necessarily larger than their peers, but they fill vital roles that give them status and protection regardless of their size. The mech boys are the engineers and technicians of orc society. These greenskins possess an instinctive understanding of machinery that appears to be genetically encoded. They know how to build and repair the ramshackle vehicles and weapons that orcs use, even though they could not explain the principles behind their work if asked. They simply see a pile of scrap metal and know, instinctively, how to turn it into a functioning weapon or vehicle. The best mech boys, known as big mechs, can create truly impressive war machines and are often second only to the war boss in influence over the warband. The pain boys serve as the orc equivalent of doctors and surgeons, though their methods would horrify any properly trained medical professional. They have an instinctive knowledge of orc biology and an enthusiasm for surgery that often surpasses their actual skill. Pain boys are responsible for treating wounded orcs, installing cybernetic replacements for lost limbs, and performing the occasional experimental procedure that either enhances an orc's combat effectiveness or kills them in spectacularly messy fashion. Orcs accept this risk with equanimity, figuring that dying on the operating table is at least more interesting than dying of infection from an untreated wound. The weird boys occupy the strangest niche in orc society. These unfortunate greenskins are psychers, channels for the collective psychic energy that all orcs generate. This energy, the manifestation of orcish belief and aggression in the immaterial realm, flows through weird boys constantly, causing them physical pain and occasional explosive releases of destructive force. Other orcs regard weird boys with a mixture of fear and amusement, finding their tendency to have their heads explode under psychic pressure both terrifying and hilarious. Weird boys, for their part, try to stay away from large gatherings of orcs where the psychic pressure becomes overwhelming, though they are dragged into battle regardless because their ability to channel destructive energy makes them valuable weapons. At the very bottom of orcoid society are the Gretchen, the smaller cousins of the orcs, who perform all the menial tasks that greenskins consider beneath their dignity. Gretchen cook the food, maintain the camps, carry messages, fetch and carry supplies, and generally serve as the labor force that keeps the warband functioning. They are kicked and bullied constantly by every orc larger than themselves, which is to say by every orc, and they accept this treatment as simply the natural order of things. Despite their lowly status, the Gretchen are more intelligent than they appear. They run complex businesses on the side, selling fungus beer and roasted squig meat to the boys, organizing gambling operations, and generally creating an entire underground economy within the warband. They hoard teeth when they can, always dreaming of somehow acquiring enough wealth to buy protection from a powerful nob, or even bribe their way into better treatment. These dreams rarely come to anything, but the Gretchen keep trying, their entrepreneurial spirit one of the few things that makes their miserable existence bearable. Below even the Gretchen are the snotlings, tiny creatures barely intelligent enough to be called sentient. These beings exist primarily to tend the fungus farms, eating as much as they want of the crops they cultivate, and occasionally being used as ammunition for the bizarre weapon called the shock attack gun. Snotlings live in a state of perpetual confusion, dimly aware of the world around them, but lacking the cognitive capacity to truly understand it. This entire elaborate hierarchy exists without any written rules or formal structure. Every orc simply knows where it fits based on its size and fighting prowess, and the system self-regulates through constant violence and intimidation. It is a society that would collapse into chaos were it not for the fact that orcs thrive in chaos, that violence is their natural state, that the constant jockeying for position is not a bug, but a feature of their engineered biology. The beauty of this system, from an orc perspective, is its perfect simplicity. There are no complex social conventions to navigate, no subtle political games to play, no need to understand abstract concepts like justice or fairness. If you want something, you take it if you are strong enough, or you defer to someone stronger if you are not. If someone insults you, you fight them to re-establish your status. If you want to lead, you grow bigger through successful violence until you are large enough to challenge whoever currently leads. This principle extends beyond individual relationships to encompass entire tribes. When two orc warbands encounter each other, the war bosses will often size each other up visually. If one is significantly larger than the other, the smaller boss will typically defer without a fight, incorporating his tribe into the larger one under the bigger war boss's leadership. If they are roughly equal in size, they might fight for supremacy, or they might agree to cooperate temporarily while maintaining separate commands, each hoping to grow large enough to eventually dominate the other. The system has no room for the weak or the unlucky. An orc who fails to grow, who loses too many fights, who cannot maintain its position in the hierarchy, will find itself sliding down the social ladder toward the bottom, bullied and abused by everyone above it. The only escape from this downward spiral is to somehow distinguish oneself in battle, to achieve victories impressive enough to trigger new growth and renewed respect from one's peers. Yet despite its brutality, or perhaps because of it, this hierarchy creates a kind of meritocracy. Leadership goes to those who have proven themselves most capable in combat. Resources flow to those who can best use them to further the warband's goals. The weak serve the strong. But the strong must constantly prove they deserve to be strong through successful violence. It is a system perfectly suited to a species engineered for eternal warfare. A social structure that ensures orcs will always be ready for battle because their entire society is itself a constant battle. And so the warband functions day after day, with every orc knowing its place and constantly working to improve that place through the only means available, growing larger through victorious combat. The warboss plans the next campaign. The knobs prepare their mobs for battle. The boys sharpen their weapons and pick fights with each other. The mech boys build new engines of destruction. The pain boys patch up the wounded. The Gretchens scurry about their business, trying to avoid being kicked while secretly running their various enterprises. And through it all, the fundamental principle remains unchanged and unchangeable. Might makes right, and the biggest orc is in charge. The brutal daily grind. Between the great campaigns and spectacular battles that define orc existence at its most glorious, there lies a different kind of brutality, the everyday violence and chaos of life in a warband at rest. Rest, in this context, is a relative term. Orcs are never truly at peace, never quiet, never still. Their camps are cauldrons of constant activity, conflict, and noise that would drive most species mad, but which greenskins find perfectly natural and even comforting. The day begins, insofar as orcs observe any regular schedule, when the sun rises or when enough orcs have woken up to make further sleep impossible for anyone else. The camp comes to life in a cacophony of sounds, the roar of engines being started and tested, the clang of metal on metal as mech boys begin their work, the shouting of knobs giving orders, the grumbling of boys complaining about those orders, and the inevitable sounds of the first fights of the day breaking out as orcs establish or re-establish their positions in the hierarchy. Food, such as it is, comes from the fungus farms that spring up wherever orcs settle for any length of time. The snotlings tend these farms with single-minded dedication, planting and harvesting various species of orcoid fungus that serve different purposes. Some varieties are eaten directly, torn off in chunks and chewed into paste that provides adequate nutrition, if not particularly pleasant flavor. Other fungi are brewed into the potent fungus beer that orcs favor, a thick, green liquid that would poison most species, but which greenskins can consume in vast quantities, with only a pleasant buzz and occasional violent vomiting as side effects. The Gretchen run informal food stalls throughout the camp, roasting squig meat over open fires and selling it to boys who have a few spare teeth to spend. These squigs, the strange ambulatory mushrooms that form part of the orcoid ecosystem, range in size from barely a mouthful to creatures large enough to serve as attack beasts or even mounts. The smaller ones are caught, killed, gutted, and roasted, their meat having a taste that orcs find pleasant and which keeps them from having to rely entirely on fungus for sustenance. Acquiring and maintaining weapons and armor consumes much of an orc's time and resources. While every greenskin has an instinctive understanding of how to build and repair basic implements of war, creating truly effective war gear requires either significant skill or sufficient teeth to pay a mech boy for their services. A boy might spend weeks scavenging scrap metal from ruined vehicles and demolished buildings, searching for pieces that can be incorporated into better armor or fashioned into more impressive weapons. The currency of this economy is, literally, teeth. Orc teeth grow continuously and fall out regularly, providing a natural and self-replenishing form of money. Some orcs, particularly those of the Bad Moons clan, have teeth that grow faster than average, making them wealthy by greenskin standards. These fortunate individuals can afford the best equipment, the finest squig meat meals, and other luxuries that poorer orcs can only dream of. Of course, nothing stops a stronger orc from simply punching the teeth out of a Bad Moon's mouth and claiming them as his own, which is why wealthy orcs either grow large enough to defend their riches or hire large knobs to protect them. The mech boy workshops, scattered throughout the camp, are centers of constant activity and frequent explosions. Here, the mechanically inclined orcs work their strange magic, combining scrap metal, looted parts, and pure intuition to create weapons and vehicles that by all rights should not function, but somehow do. A typical mech workshop is a chaotic mess of half-assembled machinery, piles of scrap, discarded failed experiments, and Gretchen assistants running frantically to fetch tools and components. Boys looking to upgrade their weapons or acquire new ones gather around these workshops, watching the mechs work and hoping for opportunities to earn teeth through odd jobs or impress a mech enough to receive a discount. The work never stops. Engines need tuning, weapons jam and require repair. Armor develops cracks that must be patched, and there is always some new design that a mech wants to try based on a vision that came to them while sleeping or got knocked into their head during a fight. The Painboy tents serve a similar function for orc biology. Here, wounded warriors come for treatment that ranges from crude but effective wound stitching to elaborate cybernetic replacements for lost limbs and damaged organs. Painboys share the mechs' enthusiasm for their craft, but apply it to flesh instead of metal, often with results that are as much experiment as treatment. An orc who loses an arm to enemy fire might return from the Painboy with a new cybernetic limb that is stronger than the original, or they might return with something that barely works, or they might not return at all if the Painboy's enthusiasm exceeded their skill. The boys accept this risk cheerfully. An orc who dies on the Painboy's operating table at least died in an interesting way, and there's always a chance that the experimental procedure might work, creating improvements that make the orc more effective in future battles. The Painboys, for their part, keep careful mental notes on what works and what does not, gradually improving their techniques through trial and error, conducted on willing subjects who literally cannot conceive of suing for malpractice. Fighting, of course, permeates every aspect of daily life. Orcs fight over insults, real or imagined. They fight over weapons and equipment. They fight over food and drink. They fight to establish dominance, to settle arguments, to relieve boredom, or simply because fighting is what orcs do and they enjoy it. These are not usually fights to the death. That would be wasteful when the combatants could be using their aggression against external enemies instead. They are more like violent negotiations, establishing which orc is tougher and settling the dispute in the process. A typical fight between boys follows an informal but well-understood pattern. First comes the posturing and insults, each orc trying to intimidate the other into backing down without actual combat. If neither backs down, they exchange a few blows to test each other's strength. If one orc is clearly outmatched, they will usually concede at this point, accepting their inferior position without losing too much face. If they are evenly matched, the fight escalates into a proper brawl that continues until one orc is knocked down or injured badly enough to admit defeat. Knobs watch these fights with the same interest that humans might watch sporting events, sometimes even taking bets on the outcome. They intervene only if the fight threatens to turn lethal or if it disrupts something important they want done. Otherwise, they let the boys settle their differences through violence, recognizing that this constant low-level combat keeps the warriors sharp and maintains the hierarchy that keeps the warband functional. The evenings, when they can be distinguished from any other time of day, often feature more organized entertainment. Orcs gather around fighting pits, where the most skilled combatants face off for the amusement of the crowd and the chance to win teeth from those betting on the outcome. Grotsneak, the legendary Painboy who operates on the most important orcs, might put on demonstrations of his latest surgical techniques, performing operations on volunteers, while crowds of orcs watch and cheer or jeer, depending on whether the patient survives. Weird boys occasionally lose control of the psychic energy building within them, creating spectacular displays of power that other orcs find hilarious and terrifying in equal measure. The Gretchen move through all of this chaos with practiced efficiency, fetching and carrying, organizing gambling operations, selling food and drink, and generally performing the 1,000 small tasks that keep the camp running. They have their own hierarchy separate from but parallel to the orcs, with the largest and craftiest grots bossing around their smaller cousins. They maintain their own shantytown areas within the larger camp, crude structures that provide minimal shelter but at least offer some respite from the constant attention of the larger greenskins. Vehicles dominate much of the camp's physical space. Orc trucks, the open-topped transport vehicles that carry boys into battle, sit in neatish rows, constantly being worked on by mechs and their Gretchen assistants. Battle wagons, the larger and more heavily armed transports, occupy places of honor near the war boss's quarters. Bikes and buggies belonging to the Evil Sun's speed freaks roar around the camp at all hours, their riders racing each other or simply enjoying the thrill of velocity. The air is thick with the smell of exhaust fumes and the sound of revving engines, a constant reminder that the warband is mobile and ready to move when the war boss decides the time has come. Weapons maintenance occupies whatever time is not spent fighting, eating, or working for the mech boys. Every orc knows that its survival depends on keeping its weapons functional, and while orc technology is remarkably robust, it still requires constant attention. Guns must be cleaned, blades sharpened, armor patched and reinforced. Boys sit in groups working on their equipment, swapping parts and techniques, arguing about the best way to maintain various weapons, occasionally trading pieces when one orc has a component that another needs. The weird boys, meanwhile, try to stay at the edges of the camp where the psychic pressure is less intense. These unfortunate orcs can feel the collective mental energy of the warband pressing against their minds, building up until it must be released in violent bursts of psychic power. They wear distinctive outfits, often decorated with bizarre symbols and charms meant to ward off the worst effects of the psychic energy, though these rarely work as well as hoped. Other orcs give them a wide berth, not out of respect, but out of a healthy fear that the weird boy might explode at any moment and take everyone nearby with them. Religious observance, such as it is, happens spontaneously rather than on any set schedule. An orc might suddenly decide to offer a prayer to Gork and Mork, the twin gods of the greenskins, asking for victory in upcoming battles or thanking them for recent success. These prayers are not solemn or contemplative. They are shouted declarations of faith, often accompanied by the firing of weapons into the air or the kicking of nearby Gretchen to emphasize important points. The gods, from an orc perspective, appreciate enthusiasm and violence, so prayer naturally takes these forms. As night falls, which orcs acknowledge only because it becomes harder to see and thus harder to fix things or fight effectively, the camp does not grow quiet, but simply shifts to different activities. Campfires spring up throughout the area, surrounded by boys trading stories of past battles and future plans. The fungus beer flows freely, purchased from entrepreneurial Gretchen, who have learned the art of brewing and now run profitable operations selling to thirsty orcs. The stories told around these fires follow familiar patterns. They are tales of glorious combat, of enemies crushed and loot taken, of narrow escapes from death and spectacular displays of violence. Every orc embellishes their own role, making themselves sound larger and more impressive than they actually were, and every other orc listening knows they are exaggerating but does not mind because they do the same thing when telling their own stories. The competitive boasting can sometimes lead to fights if one orc's claims become too outrageous for the others to tolerate, but mostly it is accepted as just another form of the constant jockeying for status that defines orc social interaction. Throughout all of this, the war boss and his nobs plan and scheme. They might be organizing the next raid, deciding which enemy settlement to attack or which convoy to ambush. They might be settling disputes between rival mobs, making sure that internal conflicts do not escalate to the point where they weaken the warband's combat effectiveness. They might be negotiating with visiting orcs from other tribes, arranging temporary alliances, or agreeing to combine forces for a particularly promising target. This is the daily life of the warband. Brutal, chaotic, violent, and somehow functional. It is existence stripped down to its most basic elements. Fight, eat, maintain your weapons, fight some more, sleep when exhausted, wake and repeat. There is no art, no philosophy, no contemplation of life's deeper meaning. There is only the endless cycle of violence and preparation for violence, the constant struggle for status and resources, the anticipation of the next battle, and the battles after that extending into infinity. For an orc, this is not depressing or soul-crushing. It is perfect. It is exactly what they were made for. The brutal daily grind is not something to escape from, but something to embrace. Because every fight makes them stronger. Every day brings new opportunities to prove themselves. And always on the horizon, there is the promise of proper warfare, of campaigns and conquests, and the glorious violence that makes existence worthwhile. The mad genius of orc technology. Among the many paradoxes that define the orcs, few are as confounding to outside observers as their relationship with technology. The greenskins build weapons and vehicles that appear to be nothing more than random collections of scrap metal held together with bolts, welds, and optimism. These contraptions should not work by any rational understanding of physics or engineering. Yet, they do work, often with devastating effectiveness, and the mystery of why and how has frustrated the greatest minds of the Adeptus Mechanicus for millennia. The answer lies in the unique biology of the orcs themselves, specifically in the genetic memory embedded in every greenskin's DNA by the old ones who created them millions of years ago. Every orc, from the lowliest youth to the mightiest war boss, possesses an instinctive understanding of how to build and maintain the basic tools of warfare. This is not learned knowledge that must be taught and studied. It is hardwired into their very being, as natural to them as breathing is to humans. A newly emerged youth already knows how to assemble a simple firearm from pieces of scrap metal. It cannot explain the principles of combustion, barrel rifling, or ammunition ballistics. It simply knows that if you take a pipe of the right size, add a firing mechanism salvaged from some other weapon, and create bullets from whatever metal is available, you will end up with a gun that shoots. The gun might explode occasionally, or jam after every few shots, or have an effective range measured in dozens of feet rather than hundreds. But it will function as a weapon, and that is all an orc requires. This instinctive knowledge goes beyond simple weapons. Orcs understand, without being taught, the basics of internal combustion engines, hydraulic systems, and electrical power generation. They can look at a pile of scrap and see potential vehicles, fortifications, or weapons. They can diagnose mechanical problems by sound alone and know intuitively which part needs to be replaced or adjusted. It is as if every orc carries within its mind a compressed encyclopedia of engineering knowledge, accessible not through conscious thought, but through pure intuition. But while all orcs possess this baseline mechanical aptitude, some are born with far more. These are the mech boys, greenskins, whose genetic memory includes vast amounts of technical knowledge that surfaces as an overwhelming compulsion to build, to tinker, to create ever more complex and destructive machines. A mech boy's life is defined by visions of weapons and vehicles that flash through their mind, designs they do not consciously invent but simply know, as if remembering something they learned long ago and forgot until this moment. The workshops of the mech boys are chaotic places where the impossible happens with such regularity that it barely registers as remarkable. A mech might take the engine from a destroyed Imperial tank, the weapon system from a looted spaceship, the armor plating from a wrecked transport truck, and several tons of miscellaneous scrap, and somehow combine these disparate components into a functioning vehicle. The vehicle will look like it was assembled by someone who had only the vaguest understanding of vehicle design, with parts welded at odd angles, armor plates of wildly different origins and thickness, and weapons mounted in positions that seem to defy the vehicle's center of gravity. Yet when the mech declares it complete and climbs into the driver's seat, the engine roars to life, the guns swivel smoothly to track targets, and the whole unlikely contraption rumbles forward as if it were built in a proper factory. The larger and more experienced mech boys, known as big mechs, can create truly impressive war machines. These master craftsmen build towering stompers and gargants, walking fortresses bristling with guns and powered by engines that should not have the power-to-weight ratio to move such massive structures. They construct shock attack guns that somehow tear holes in reality to teleport attack squigs directly into enemy positions. They create custom force fields that project protective bubbles of energy using principles that human scientists cannot explain or replicate. What makes all of this possible? What allows Orc technology to function despite its apparent violation of engineering principles? Is the collective psychic field that all Orcs generate. This field, the manifestation of Orcish belief and expectation in the immaterial realm of the warp, has the power to alter reality itself when enough greenskins focus their unconscious will on the same thing. Orcs believe, with absolute certainty, that their weapons will work. They know, without doubt, that if you pull the trigger on a gun, it will fire. They expect that when a mech builds a vehicle, it will run. This collective belief, multiplied across hundreds or thousands of Orcs in a warband, becomes a form of psychic reinforcement that makes the technology actually function as intended. The most famous example of this phenomenon is the Orc belief that red vehicles go faster. This seems like pure superstition, and indeed, there is no physical reason why paint color should affect a vehicle's speed. Yet Orc vehicles painted red consistently demonstrate higher top speeds than identical vehicles painted other colors. The Orcs expect red to make things go faster, and the psychic field generated by that expectation makes it so. Similarly, Orcs believe that yellow is associated with bigger explosions, that blue brings good luck, and that purple makes things sneaky. And in each case, the belief creates enough psychic reinforcement to become true. This does not mean that Orc technology runs purely on belief with no physical basis. The weapons and vehicles the mech boys create are real, functional machines with actual mechanical components that would work, at least partially, even without psychic reinforcement. A human could pick up an Orc slugger, examine its mechanism, and understand in principle how it operates. They could pull the trigger and, assuming they were strong enough to overcome the heavy trigger pull that Orcs prefer, the gun would fire. The bullet would be propelled by actual gunpowder igniting in an actual chamber, creating actual gases that expand and push the projectile down the barrel. But that same human would notice that the tolerances are wrong, that the barrel appears to be a simple pipe with no rifling, that the firing mechanism looks like it was assembled from 3 different weapons of incompatible design, and that several critical components appear to be held in place by nothing more than generous applications of crude welding. By any conventional understanding, this weapon should jam after the first shot or simply explode in the user's hand. Yet in Orc hands, it fires repeatedly, requiring only occasional maintenance and clearing of jams that would disable a precision human weapon 10 times as quickly. The psychic field bridges the gap between barely functional by human standards and devastatingly effective by Orc standards. It smooths over the imperfections, compensates for the crude construction, and makes the technology work better than it physically should. An Orc mechanic fixing a broken weapon does not need to understand exactly what is wrong. They simply bang on it with a wrench while believing firmly that this will fix the problem, and often it does, because the combination of crude mechanical adjustment and psychic reinforcement resolves whatever issue was preventing the weapon from functioning. This creates a feedback loop between Orc technology and Orc belief. The mechs build weapons and vehicles according to their genetic programming and intuitive understanding. The weapons work, reinforcing Orc belief in their effectiveness. This increased belief makes the weapons work even better, which creates more confidence, which generates more psychic reinforcement. The system is self-sustaining and self-improving, allowing Orc technology to evolve and advance despite the complete absence of formal scientific methodology or engineering education. Different mechs specialize in different types of technology based on their particular visions and obsessions. Some focus on building the biggest, loudest guns possible, creating weapons that fire shells the size of humans and make a noise that can rupture eardrums at 100 paces. Others dedicate themselves to vehicle construction, building ever faster, more heavily armed transports and battle wagons. Still others experiment with more exotic technologies, teleportation devices, energy weapons, force field generators, and other advanced systems that they somehow make work, despite having no theoretical understanding of the principles involved. The workshop of a big mech is a treasure trove of partially completed projects, each one representing a vision that came to the mech in a dream or was knocked into their head during a fight. Many of these projects will never be completed. The mech's attention will shift to some new obsession, leaving the old work to gather dust until parts are scavenged for future builds. But some projects capture the mech's imagination so completely that they become all-consuming missions, with the mech working day and night, dragooning Gretchen into service as assistants, and spending every tooth they can acquire on materials and components. These obsessive building projects sometimes produce masterpieces of orc engineering. A mech might spend months constructing a single weapon of such power and complexity that it becomes legendary within the warband. A big mech might dedicate years to building a stomper, a towering war machine that becomes the centerpiece of the war boss's forces and the pride of the entire tribe. These creations are not beautiful by conventional standards, but they are effective, and effectiveness is the only aesthetic criterion that orcs recognize or value. The maintenance of all this technology falls to the mechs and their Gretchen assistants. Orc vehicles and weapons require constant attention, not because they are poorly made, though by conventional standards they are, but because they are used so roughly and in such violent conditions that even the most robust construction would eventually fail. Engines are run at maximum power for hours at a time. Weapons are fired until their barrels glow red with heat. Armor is subjected to stress that would buckle steel. The mechs handle this through a combination of genuine repair work and psychic encouragement. They replace parts that have broken beyond repair. They tighten bolts that have worked loose. They weld cracks in armor plating and clear jams from gun mechanisms. But they also simply bang on things with wrenches while muttering that they should work, applying the collective belief that sufficient percussive maintenance can fix any problem. The fact that this actually works more often than not is a testament to the power of the orcish psychic field and the robustness of orc construction. For the regular boys, acquiring good weapons and maintaining them is a constant preoccupation. A boy might start his career with a crude slugger assembled from scrap and a knife fashioned from a sharpened piece of metal. Through successful fighting and accumulation of teeth, he might upgrade to better weapons, a properly constructed shooter acquired from a mech, a chain blade looted from a fallen enemy, armor plates thick enough to stop anything short of heavy weapons fire. Each upgrade represents a significant investment of resources and status. The boy must either earn enough teeth to commission the mech to build what he wants, or he must prove himself valuable enough that the mech decides to give him better equipment as part of a larger deal. Some boys become assistants to mechs, performing odd jobs and learning the basics of maintenance in exchange for access to better weapons and armor. Others specialize in looting enemy equipment, becoming expert at quickly stripping useful components from fallen foes before anyone else can claim them. The end result is a warband equipped with a bewildering variety of weapons and vehicles, no two exactly alike, all of them functioning despite their apparent ramshackle construction. It is an arsenal that grows and evolves organically as mechs follow their visions, boys upgrade their equipment, and captured enemy technology is incorporated into the orcish style. It is technology born from genetic memory and sustained by collective belief, a perfect fusion of ancient engineering knowledge and psychic reinforcement that allows the orcs to field weapons and vehicles that can challenge even the most advanced militaries in the galaxy. And through it all, the mechs continue their work, building, repairing, experimenting, and occasionally blowing themselves up when an experiment goes spectacularly wrong. They are the mad geniuses of orc society, the greenskins whose visions and obsessions keep the warband armed and mobile, ready to bring destruction to any enemy foolish enough to stand before the green tide. Their technology may be crude, but it is effective. And in the brutal calculus of orc warfare, effectiveness is the only metric that truly matters. Gods of brutality and cunning. In the immaterial realm of the warp, where the thoughts and emotions of sentient beings take form as psychic energy, there exist two entities that embody the collective soul of the orc race. They are Gork and Mork, the twin gods of the greenskins, and they are exactly what you would expect from deities worshipped by a species that knows only warfare. They are massive beyond comprehension, violent beyond measure, and engaged in eternal combat with each other and anything else they encounter. They are, in the most fundamental sense, the perfect reflection of orcish nature writ large across the cosmos. The difference between these twin gods is simultaneously profound and trivial, crucial to orc theology, and utterly meaningless from any outside perspective. Gork, the orcs will tell you with absolute certainty, is brutal but cunning. Mork, they will explain with equal conviction, is cunning but brutal. To anyone not an orc, this seems like a distinction without a difference. But to the greenskins, it represents two essential aspects of how warfare should be conducted. Gork hits you when you are looking. He is the straightforward application of overwhelming force, the direct charge into combat, the brutal assault that crushes opposition through sheer power. When an orc invokes Gork, they are calling on the god of frontal assault, of direct confrontation, of the glorious melee where the strongest warrior emerges victorious. Gork is brutality in its purest form, violence applied without subtlety or hesitation, the manifestation of orcish aggression at its most honest. Mork hits you when you are not looking. He represents the cunning approach, the ambush from unexpected quarters, the knife in the back, the trap sprung at the perfect moment. When an orc prays to Mork, they are seeking the favor of the god who rewards cleverness in combat, who appreciates a well-laid plan as much as raw strength. Mork is brutality delivered with thought, violence applied with at least a modicum of strategy, the acknowledgement that even in warfare, sometimes it pays to think before you smash. The orcs argue endlessly about which god is more important, which approach to combat is superior. These arguments can become so heated that entire wars have been fought over whether Gork or Mork deserves greater reverence. Of course, these wars are fought with the same enthusiasm as any other orc conflict, and both sides would agree that regardless of which god is technically superior, fighting about it is an excellent way to honor both deities simultaneously. The truth, insofar as truth exists in such matters, is that both gods are manifestations of the same fundamental orcish nature. They exist because orcs exist, formed from the collective psychic energy of the greenskin species, in the same way that the chaos gods are formed from the emotions of other sentient races. Every orc's unconscious mind contributes to their presence in the warp, feeding them with the psychic energy generated by fighting, violence, and the pure joy that greenskins feel in combat. This makes Gork and Mork unusual among the entities that dwell in the warp. Unlike the Chaos Gods, who feed on the suffering and excess of all sentient species, the Orc Gods draw power exclusively from their own people. Unlike the Elder Gods who were destroyed by the birth of Slaanesh, Gork and Mork are sustained by a species that numbers in the countless trillions across the galaxy and which generates enormous amounts of psychic energy through constant warfare. They are, in a very real sense, the purest reflection of orcish culture, brutal, direct, perpetually engaged in combat, and absolutely indestructible. Religious practice among the orcs is as straightforward as everything else in their culture. There are no elaborate temples, no formal clergy beyond the occasional orc who claims to have special insight into divine will, no complex rituals or sacred texts. An orc who wishes to pray to Gork and Mork simply shouts their request to the sky, usually while fighting or preparing for battle. The prayer is rarely humble or supplicating. It is more commonly a declaration of intent, a promise to deliver violence in the god's honor, a boast about past victories, and a vow to achieve even greater glory in battles to come. Gork and Mork, watch me smash Disagits good and proper, is a typical orcish prayer, bellowed while charging into combat. The theological sophistication may be lacking, but the sincerity is absolute. The orc truly believes that the gods are watching, that they care about the outcome of this particular fight, and that fighting well will please them. And because enough orcs believe this with sufficient intensity, the psychic field they generate makes it, in a strange way, true. The gods are believed to offer assistance to orcs who are fighting particularly well, or who are engaged in especially glorious combat. An orc who survives against impossible odds might attribute their success to divine intervention from Gork or Mork. A greenskin whose headshot somehow misses vital components despite hitting their target directly might believe that Gork himself guided their hand. These beliefs, multiplied across millions of orcs engaged in countless battles, create feedback loops of psychic energy that make improbable survivals and unlikely victories slightly more common among greenskins than pure chance would suggest. The manifestation of the gods in the physical world takes the form of the greatest war machines the mech boys can create. Gargants and Stompers, the towering bipedal war engines that stride across battlefields like walking fortresses, are believed to be inspired directly by visions from Gork and Mork. The mech boys who build these machines claim that the designs come to them in dreams, sent by the gods themselves as blueprints for their earthly avatars. Whether this is literally true, or simply the mechs interpreting their genetic memory as divine inspiration, is a question that probably cannot be answered, and certainly does not matter to the orcs. What matters is that the great war machines exist, that they tower over the battlefield like vengeful gods, made manifest in steel and firepower, and that they crush enemies with the same brutal efficiency that Gork and Mork are believed to employ in their eternal battles in the warp. The relationship between the orc gods and the chaos gods is unclear even to those who study such matters. The gods of chaos feed on emotions that orcs do not really feel in the same way as other species. Orcs do not experience the despair that feeds Nurgle, or the excess that sustains Slaanesh. They know anger, which is Khorne's domain, but their anger is channeled almost entirely into combat rather than rage for its own sake. They possess cunning, which might appeal to Tzeentch, but their schemes rarely extend beyond the next battle or the next fight for dominance within the warband. Some scholars theorize that Gork and Mork fight the Chaos Gods in the Warp, eternal battles between different manifestations of psychic energy with no possibility of permanent victory for either side. Others suggest that the Orc gods are so purely focused on warfare that they barely notice the Chaos Gods except as additional opponents to fight. Still others propose that the relationship is more complex, with periods of conflict alternating with periods where the gods simply ignore each other, pursuing their own incomprehensible agendas in realms where mortal understanding fails. From the Orc perspective, none of this matters. Gork and Mork are their gods. The gods want them to fight. They are fighting. The gods are pleased. This theological simplicity is not a sign of primitive thinking, but rather a reflection of the orcs' engineered nature. They were created to be warriors, perfect fighters who would never question their purpose or seek meaning beyond combat. Having gods who demand nothing except violence is perfectly suited to a species whose entire existence revolves around warfare. Occasionally, an orc will claim to have received a vision from the gods, a divine message commanding some great action or revealing some profound truth. The most famous example in recent history is Gazg Kul Mag Uruk Thraka, the greatest war boss of the current age, who survived catastrophic head trauma and emerged claiming that Gork and Mork had spoken to him directly. They told him, he said, that he was destined to unite the orcs and lead a crusade so massive that it would bring the gods themselves into the physical realm to fight alongside their chosen children. Whether Gazkul truly received divine visions, or whether his damaged brain simply started producing grandiose delusions, is impossible to determine. What matters is that other orcs believe him, that his claimed connection to the gods has given him a status beyond mere physical size, that his religious authority combines with his martial prowess to make him the most influential orc in the galaxy. Millions of greenskins follow him, not just because he is huge and powerful, but because they believe he speaks with the voice of Gork and Mork themselves. This demonstrates the real power of orc religion, not in any objective supernatural intervention, but in its ability to unite greenskins behind common purpose and leadership. A war boss who claims divine favor must back that claim with victories. But if they can demonstrate both spiritual authority and martial success, they can command loyalty from orcs, who would otherwise spend all their time fighting each other. The psychic energy generated by orc religious belief feeds back into the gods themselves, making them stronger in the warp, which in turn makes it more likely that the gods will actually intervene in subtle ways, which reinforces orc faith, which generates more psychic energy. It is a cycle that has sustained itself for millions of years and shows no signs of weakening. In the end, Gork and Mork are exactly what the orcs need their gods to be: eternally fighting, impossible to permanently defeat, absolutely committed to violence, and perfectly happy with worshippers who honor them by doing what they were always going to do anyway. They are gods without complex moral codes, without demands for sacrifice beyond what orcs would sacrifice gladly, without any requirement except that their followers keep fighting until the end of time. For a species that knows nothing but warfare and wants nothing but warfare, these are perfect deities. They ask nothing impossible, promise nothing beyond more opportunities to fight, and deliver exactly what their followers desire: divine endorsement for doing what comes naturally to every orc. In the brutal simplicity of this relationship lies its genius, and in its genius lies its eternal sustainability. The orcs will fight because that is what they do. The gods will grow stronger from that fighting, and the cycle will continue, unchanging and unending, until the last orc spore in the galaxy finally fails to germinate, which is to say, forever. The pure joy of violence. There exists in the orc psyche something that most species would find incomprehensible: genuine, unfeigned delight in combat. Not the grim satisfaction of defending one's home, not the dutiful acceptance of necessary violence, not even the warrior's pride in skill well applied. What orcs feel when they fight is pure, childlike joy, the ecstatic pleasure of doing exactly what they were made to do. For a greenskin, combat is not a means to an end, but an end in itself, the highest and most satisfying activity possible. This becomes immediately apparent when a war band goes to battle. As the orcs move into position, preparing to engage their enemies, their behavior shifts noticeably. The constant low-level fighting and bickering that characterizes daily camp life intensifies into focused anticipation. Boys check and recheck their weapons, not with the nervous anxiety of soldiers facing danger, but with the eager excitement of athletes before a championship match. Knobs bellow orders with increased volume and enthusiasm, their voices carrying notes of anticipatory glee. The war boss, that massive greenskin who has fought more battles than most species wage in a generation, betrays the same excitement as the greenest youth about to experience their first true combat. Then comes the moment when the enemy is sighted, when the opportunity for battle transforms from possibility to certainty. The change that overtakes the orcs is immediate and dramatic. The waiting and preparation ends. The joy begins. With a deafening roar that starts with the war boss and spreads through the entire warband like a contagion of violence, the orcs surge forward. Not in disciplined ranks or coordinated waves, but in a great green tide of uncoordinated enthusiasm, each warrior racing forward as fast as their legs or vehicles can carry them. The sound they make is indescribable to those who have not heard it. It is part war cry, part laugh, part incoherent screaming, all combined into a wall of noise that can be heard for miles. Every orc adds their voice to the chorus, from the deepest bellow of the largest knob to the high-pitched yelling of the smallest youth. They call on Gork and Mork. They shout challenges to their enemies. They boast about what they are going to do when they reach the enemy lines. They simply make noise for the pure pleasure of adding to the cacophony. The collective psychic energy generated by this massed violence does more than just make orc technology work better. It creates a feedback loop that enhances every greenskin's physical and mental capabilities. They become stronger, faster, more resilient. Their weapons hit harder. Their vehicles move faster. The belief that they are unstoppable becomes, through psychic reinforcement, temporarily true. This phenomenon, this surge of collective power fueled by shared purpose and absolute certainty in victory, is what makes the orc assault so devastating. When the orcs hit the enemy line, there is no careful tactical engagement, no measured response to enemy dispositions. There is only the crash of bodies colliding, the roar of guns firing at point-blank range, the clash of blades meeting armor, and the absolute chaos of close combat conducted by warriors who were literally engineered for this exact purpose. The orcs do not try to preserve their lives at the expense of victory. They do not calculate acceptable losses or consider retreating to defensible positions. They simply fight, throwing themselves at the enemy with complete abandon, seeking not to survive, but to engage in the most glorious possible violence. The weapons the orcs employ reflect this philosophy of combat. The slugger, the standard orc pistol, is designed for close-range firefights where accuracy matters less than volume of fire. It is loud, crude, and perfectly suited to being fired one-handed, while the other hand swings a chopper into enemy flesh. The chopper itself is a massive cleaver-like blade, too heavy for most humans to wield effectively, but perfectly sized for orc strength, designed to simply hack through armor and bone with brutal efficiency. More specialized orcs carry more specialized weapons. The shooters, larger rifles capable of longer range fire, are still crude by human standards, but effective in the hands of warriors who compensate for accuracy with enthusiasm and volume. Big shooters, heavy weapons that fire streams of large caliber bullets, require 2 orcs or a weapon mount to use effectively, but can tear through enemy infantry and light vehicles with ease. Rockets, the orc equivalent of missile launchers, fire projectiles that are as likely to explode prematurely as they are to hit their target, but which create satisfyingly large explosions when they do connect. The close combat specialists wield even more intimidating hardware: power claws, massive hydraulic claws that can crush vehicles and tear through reinforced bunkers, are favored by knobs and war bosses for their combination of raw power and intimidation factor. Choppers come in countless varieties, from simple blades to chainsawed equivalents that scream with mechanical fury as they rip through flesh. Some orcs prefer massive hammers or clubs, weapons that require enormous strength to wield, but which can pulverize enemies in single blows. In the thick of combat, orcs fight with a style that combines natural ferocity with the combat instincts coded into their genetic memory. They understand, without being taught, how to use their superior strength and toughness against more fragile opponents. They know where armor is weakest and where to strike for maximum effect. They can coordinate attacks without communication, multiple orcs instinctively working together to bring down tougher enemies. This is not learned skill, but inherited knowledge, the accumulated combat wisdom of millions of years of warfare distilled into instinct. The orcs take damage that would incapacitate or kill members of most other species and simply continue fighting. Their hybrid fungal animal biology makes them remarkably resilient. They have redundant organs and simplified physiology that reduces the number of truly vital body parts. Their blood clots quickly, limiting blood loss from wounds. Their bodies can function effectively even with damage that would cause shock and unconsciousness in humans. An orc can lose an arm and continue fighting one-handed. They can be shot multiple times and keep advancing. They can sustain injuries that would be fatal to others and survive long enough to receive treatment from the pain boys. This resilience is not just biological, but psychological. Orcs do not experience fear in combat the way other species do. They understand danger intellectually. They can recognize when a situation has become too dangerous even for them. But the primal terror that grips humans facing death is largely absent from the greenskin's psyche. They were engineered to fight, and the fear response that might cause hesitation or flight has been mostly edited out of their emotional repertoire. What they feel instead is exhilaration. Every moment of combat is the fulfillment of their biological purpose. Every enemy struck down is a source of satisfaction. Every near miss, every close call, every desperate struggle adds excitement to the experience. Where human soldiers endure the horror of warfare and dream of peace, orcs revel in the horror and dread the possibility of peace. This does not mean they are suicidal. An orc will seek to survive if possible, preferring to live and fight another day rather than die needlessly. They understand tactical retreat when faced with overwhelming force, though they rarely employ it because their definition of overwhelming force is skewed significantly toward accepting unfavorable odds. They value their lives in the sense that they want to continue experiencing the joy of combat, which requires being alive. But they do not fear death in any conventional sense. Death means releasing spores that will grow into new orcs who will continue the fight. Death in glorious combat means entering the hall of the greatest warriors, joining Gork and Mork in eternal warfare in the realm beyond death. Or, if the orc is not particularly religious, death is simply the end of consciousness, and what comes after is not worth worrying about when there are enemies to fight right now. This fearlessness, combined with their physical resilience and their sheer numbers, makes orcs terrifying opponents. They cannot be intimidated. They cannot be broken by casualties. They cannot be frightened into surrender by displays of superior firepower. The only way to stop an orc assault is to kill enough greenskins that the remainder are physically unable to continue the attack, and given how many orcs there usually are, and how hard they are to kill, this requires enormous amounts of firepower sustained over long periods. The aftermath of battle shows the orcs at their most content. Victory brings celebration, crude victory songs, consumption of fungus beer, the claiming of loot and trophies from fallen enemies. Orcs who distinguish themselves in combat receive praise from their peers and might grow larger from the success. Weapons and vehicles damaged in combat are repaired or replaced. The dead are barely mourned. They died doing what orcs do, and their spores will create new warriors to replace them. Even defeat, that rare and disturbing occurrence when orcs are forced to retreat from overwhelming enemy force, is not the crushing blow it would be for other species. The orcs who survive will simply regroup, argue about what went wrong, usually blaming each other rather than accepting any tactical deficiencies, and prepare to try again. They might seek revenge against the enemies who defeated them, or they might move on to easier targets, but they will not be demoralized or disheartened in any lasting way. Injuries sustained in combat are worn as badges of honor. Scars are displayed proudly, each one representing a battle survived and an enemy faced. Orcs who lose limbs to enemy action often have them replaced with crude cybernetic prosthetics that are sometimes more effective than the original biological parts. These bionics become part of the orc's identity, visible proof of their combat experience and survivability. The pain boys who perform these repairs and augmentations are themselves enthusiastic about their work. An orc with an interesting injury is a source of fascination and an opportunity for the pain boy to try new surgical techniques. The patient, for their part, accepts whatever modifications the pain boy decides to install, trusting that anything that makes them more effective in combat is worthwhile and stoically accepting occasional failures as the price of progress. Through it all, the fundamental truth remains unchanged. Orcs love to fight, not in the abstract sense of appreciating martial arts or enjoying competitive sports, but in the immediate, visceral sense of finding genuine happiness in violence. It is not a means to achieve other goals. It is the goal itself, the reason for existence, the source of meaning in an otherwise meaningless universe. This makes them possibly the most dangerous species in the galaxy, because they can never be satisfied, never be appeased, never be negotiated with in any meaningful way. They do not want territory or resources except as means to facilitate more fighting. They do not seek to impose their culture on others because they barely have a culture beyond warfare. They cannot be deterred by threats or persuaded by promises. They want only to fight, and they will continue wanting to fight until the last orc in the galaxy finally falls, which, given their method of reproduction through spores, may well be never. The pure joy of violence, hardwired into every cell of orc biology, makes them the perfect warriors and the perfect nightmare. They are an enemy that cannot be reasoned with, cannot be intimidated, cannot be permanently defeated, and most terrifyingly of all, cannot be made to stop wanting to fight. This is what it means to be an orc, to find in violence the highest expression of existence, to know in combat the greatest possible joy, and to face every battle not with grim determination, but with genuine, unrestrained happiness at the opportunity to do what you were made to do. When the great green tide rises, there are moments in the history of the galaxy when the constant low-level warfare of the orcs coalesces into something far more terrifying. These are the times when a warboss of sufficient size and charisma manages to unite not just a single tribe, but dozens or hundreds of tribes under a single banner, when millions or even billions of greenskins surge across the stars in a campaign of destruction, so massive that entire sectors of space burn in their wake. These are the Grand Crusades, the times when the full terrifying potential of the orc species manifests in concentrated form. The beginning of such a campaign is rarely planned in any conventional sense. It emerges organically from the convergence of several factors: a particularly large and successful warboss, a concentration of orc tribes in a region of space where good fights are plentiful, and the building psychic momentum that occurs when enough greenskins begin moving in the same direction with the same purpose. What starts as one tribe raiding human settlements or Eldar worlds gradually attracts other tribes who want to join in the fun, and these tribes attract still more, until a critical mass is reached and the movement becomes self-sustaining. The psychic component of this phenomenon is crucial. As more orcs gather and more victories are achieved, the collective psychic field they generate intensifies. This energy, this manifestation of pure orcish enthusiasm and certainty of victory, begins to affect even orcs who are not physically present. Greenskins across the region feel a pull, a compulsion to join this great gathering of warriors, to be part of something larger than their individual tribes. It is not a conscious decision so much as an instinctive response to psychic pressure, like migrating birds responding to seasonal changes they cannot consciously perceive, but which nonetheless drive their behavior. Warbosses who resist the pull, or who try to maintain their independence, find their tribes deserting them as individual orcs, and entire mobs simply leave to join the growing movement. Those warbosses who are wise, or at least pragmatic enough, will lead their tribes to the gathering themselves, hoping to maintain some authority over their warriors and perhaps carve out a position of importance in the larger hierarchy. The alternative is to watch their power base erode as the pull of the crusade overcomes any loyalty or fear that kept the boys in line. The war boss at the center of this storm, the greenskin whose success and size first triggered the cascade, finds themselves commanding forces beyond anything they might have imagined. Where once they led hundreds or thousands of orcs, now they command millions. Where they once planned raids on individual settlements, now they can assault entire worlds. The scale of their operation transforms from local banditry to strategic conquest, and with it comes a level of power that few orcs in history have ever achieved. But this power comes with challenges. Managing millions of orcs is not like managing thousands. The infighting and competition for status that defines smaller warbands scales up proportionally, creating the potential for internal conflicts that could tear the entire crusade apart before it accomplishes anything of note. The war boss must be strong enough to crush any challenger who emerges, cunning enough to keep the most powerful knobs from uniting against them, and successful enough in battle that the boys remain convinced that following this particular leader offers the best opportunities for fighting and glory. The crusade begins to move, a great migration of violence across the stars. Orc ships, ramshackle collections of scrap metal and looted Imperial vessels held together by the same combination of crude engineering and psychic reinforcement that makes all orc technology function, form vast fleets that darken the void. These ships travel through the warp, that realm of chaos and madness where the laws of physics do not apply, guided more by orcish certainty about where they want to go than by any proper navigation. The ships themselves are testaments to orc engineering at its most ambitious. They are built from captured vessels, salvaged wrecks, and materials scavenged from whatever sources the orcs can access. Some are ancient hulks that should have disintegrated centuries ago, but which continue functioning through sheer orcish belief that they will hold together. Others are more recent constructions, created by big mechs with visions of mighty warships dancing in their heads, festooned with weapons and armor in configurations that make human naval architects weep. Travel through the warp should be impossible for the orcs. They lack the sophisticated navigation systems that allow Imperial ships to chart safe courses through the immaterial realm. They do not have Geller fields of the same quality that protect other species from the entities that dwell in the warp. By all rights, their ships should be lost in the chaos or consumed by demons the moment they leave real space. Yet they survive and navigate with surprising accuracy, for reasons that scholars can only theorize about. Perhaps the collective psychic field of millions of orcs provides a kind of protection, a bubble of certainty, that keeps the warp's chaos at bay. Perhaps the orc gods themselves protect their children during these journeys. Perhaps the demons of the warp simply find orcs too tedious to bother with, being unable to feed on their straightforward emotions the way they can feed on human fear and despair. Whatever the reason, the fleet arrives at its destination, drops out of the warp, and unleashes violence on a scale that can scarcely be comprehended. Entire worlds are assaulted simultaneously. Millions of orcs pour from landing craft and drop pods, hitting planetary surfaces like green rain, already fighting before they fully exit their transports. The defending forces, whether Imperial Guard, Space Marines, Eldar warriors, or whatever species happens to occupy the world being attacked, suddenly find themselves facing a tide of enemies that seems endless. The initial assault is chaos incarnate. Orcs crash into defensive positions with no regard for casualties or tactical coordination. They do not seek to minimize losses or preserve resources for future operations. They simply attack, trusting that their numbers and ferocity will overcome whatever resistance they encounter. In many cases, this trust is justified. Defensive lines that could hold against disciplined enemies crumble under the weight of green-skinned bodies, the sheer mass of the assault overwhelming prepared positions through attrition. But the crusade is not just mindless violence, despite appearances. The war boss and the more intelligent knobs actually do plan and coordinate to some degree. They identify key targets, enemy command centers, ammunition depots, fortifications that anchor defensive networks. They send specialized units to address specific threats, tank busters to destroy enemy armor, storm boys to strike at rear areas, commandos to sabotage critical infrastructure. These are not sophisticated strategies by the standards of professional militaries, but they are strategies nonetheless, and they are executed with an enthusiasm that makes up for any lack of subtlety. As the planetary assault continues, the Orc camp on the surface grows into something resembling a massive city, though no human city was ever this chaotic or violent. Millions of greenskins occupy territory taken from the enemy, establishing temporary settlements while they prepare for the next push. The mech boys work around the clock building and repairing vehicles. The pain boys treat the wounded and install bionics on those who lost limbs in combat. The regular boys fight among themselves, maintain their equipment, and prepare for the next battle. The fighting continues for weeks or months or even years, depending on the size and determination of the defenders. Every day brings new combat, new opportunities for glory, new chances to prove one's worth and grow larger. The Orcs rotate through the front lines naturally, those who have been fighting longest falling back for rest and resupply, while fresh mobs surge forward to take their place. There is no formal organization to this rotation. It simply happens organically as tired Orcs retire to the camps, and rested warriors seek out the fighting. Eventually, if the defenders are not strong enough or numerous enough to hold, the planet falls. The last resistance is crushed. The surviving enemy either flees or is killed, or is enslaved to work in Orc labor camps. The victorious greenskins celebrate their success, but the celebration is brief. Already, the war boss and the nobs are looking toward the next target, the next world to conquer, the next battle to fight. This is when the true nature of the crusade becomes apparent. It does not end with the conquest of a single world, or even a dozen worlds. It continues, driven by momentum and the psychic energy of millions of Orcs all pointed in the same direction. World after world falls. System after system burns. The crusade grows larger as it succeeds, attracting more Orcs, growing more powerful, becoming an unstoppable force that seems capable of consuming the entire galaxy. But even the greatest crusade must eventually end. Sometimes this happens through enemy action, when defenders finally muster enough force to destroy the Orc fleet and scatter the ground forces. Sometimes it happens when the war boss is killed and no successor emerges strong enough to maintain unity, causing the crusade to fragment back into individual tribes. Sometimes it simply runs out of momentum, the psychic energy that drove it dissipating as Orcs grow bored with constant victory and begin fighting among themselves instead of pushing forward. When the crusade ends, the Orcs disperse, returning to their normal patterns of behavior. The great army that terrified an entire region of space dissolves into hundreds of smaller warbands, each going its own way, seeking new fights and new opportunities for glory. The war boss who commanded millions might find himself leading only thousands again if he survives at all. The grand vision of conquest gives way to the mundane reality of daily survival and constant low-level warfare. But the memory remains. The Orcs who participated in the crusade remember the glory of fighting alongside millions of their kind, the joy of overwhelming victory after victory, the sense of being part of something greater than themselves. And somewhere in the galaxy, another war boss is growing larger. Another concentration of Orc tribes is forming. Another psychic momentum is building toward the next great surge of green-skinned violence. This is the pattern that has repeated throughout Orc history and will continue repeating as long as the species exists. Periods of dispersed raiding and tribal warfare, punctuated by occasional massive crusades that shake entire regions of the galaxy. It is the natural rhythm of a species designed for eternal warfare, the ebb and flow of violence that defines Orc existence at both the individual and collective level. The crusade may end, but the war never does. It simply changes scale, shifts location, transforms in character while remaining fundamentally unchanged in purpose. The greatest of the greenskins. Among the countless billions of orcs who fight and die and are reborn across the galaxy, a few rare individuals achieve a status that transcends normal greenskin hierarchy. These are the legendary war bosses, greenskins who grow so large, fight so successfully, and command such loyalty that their names echo across entire sectors of space, spoken with fear by their enemies and reverence by their followers. The greatest of these in the current age is Gazkul Mag Uruk Thraka, a name that has become synonymous with the orc threat to imperial space. His story begins unremarkably, as all orc stories do, with emergence from fungal growth on a world called Urk. He was simply one more youth among thousands, distinguished by nothing except perhaps a slightly larger size than his peers. His early career involved the typical progression, fighting for status, growing through successful combat, gradually rising through the ranks of his tribe. Then came the injury that changed everything. During a raid on facilities left behind by Space Marines who had attacked Urk years before, a bolter round struck Gazgakul in the head. The shot destroyed a significant portion of his skull and damaged his brain so severely that he should have died. Instead, he was found by Mad Doc Grotznik, the most infamous painboy in orc history, who saw in the dying greenskin an opportunity for his most ambitious surgery yet. Grotznik replaced the destroyed portion of Gazgkul's skull with a plate of adamantium, the same near-indestructible metal that forms the bones of Space Marine Terminators. But the painboy did not stop with simple reconstruction. He added additional components, implants and augmentations that may have been technological, may have been psychic, or may have been some combination of both. When Gazkul finally recovered consciousness, he was different. The greenskin who emerged from Grotznik's operating tent spoke of visions from Gork and Mork themselves. The twin gods had appeared to him, he claimed, during his time unconscious. They had shown him the future of the orc race, a destiny in which all greenskins would unite under a single banner and wage war on a scale the galaxy had never seen. They had chosen him, Gazakul Mag Uruk Thraka, to be their prophet and their instrument, the war boss who would lead this great crusade. Whether these visions were genuine divine revelation, the result of brain damage combined with Grotznik's surgical modifications, or some combination of both, is impossible to determine. What matters is that Gazkul believed them absolutely, and more importantly, he convinced other orcs to believe them as well. His claimed divine mission, combined with his rapidly increasing size and his undeniable success in battle, attracted followers from across Urk and eventually from beyond. Within a remarkably short time, Gazkul had united the fractious orc tribes of Urk under his command. No small feat on a world where war bosses typically spent more time fighting each other than external enemies. He achieved this through a combination of personal combat prowess, proven military success, and the religious authority that came from his claimed connection to Gork and Mork. Orcs who might have resisted a merely large and successful war boss found themselves unable to oppose one who spoke, or claimed to speak, with the voice of the gods themselves. Then Gazkul did something that demonstrated his unusual strategic vision for an orc. He left Urk. Most war bosses, having achieved dominance over their home territory, would have been content to raid nearby systems and maintain their position. Gazkul understood that his destiny lay elsewhere, that to fulfill the vision the gods had supposedly given him, he needed to seek out greater challenges and larger wars. His target was Armageddon, a heavily industrialized imperial world of enormous strategic importance. The planet produced vast quantities of war material for the Imperial Guard and served as a linchpin for imperial control of the entire sector. It was also, though Gazkul could not have known this through conventional intelligence gathering, a world of deep spiritual significance to the orc race, a place where the ancient war machines of their distant past had once strode, and where the psychic resonance of those long-ago battles still lingered in the warp. The First War for Armageddon, as it came to be known, began when Ghazghkul's fleet emerged from a captured space hulk and began the invasion. The Orcs struck with overwhelming force, their numbers augmented by greenskins, who had been drawn to Ghazghkul's crusade during the journey from Urk. Millions of Orcs poured onto the planet's surface, and for a time, it seemed that nothing could stop them. What saved Armageddon was not superior Imperial strategy or overwhelming firepower, but the presence of one man, Commissar Sebastian Yarrick, a veteran Imperial officer who took command of the defense and organized resistance with grim determination. Yarrick understood the Orcs better than most Imperial commanders, having fought them throughout his career. He knew that they could not be intimidated, but they could be frustrated, that they respected strength above all other qualities, and that defeating them required not just firepower, but the will to continue fighting even when victory seemed impossible. The war raged for months. Ghazghkul and Yarrick became aware of each other as the two most important individuals on opposite sides of the conflict. The Orc war boss recognized in the human commissar a worthy opponent, someone who fought with the kind of determination and strength that Orcs valued. Yarrick, for his part, saw in Ghazghkul a threat unlike any other Orc war boss he had encountered, a greenskin who combined physical might with genuine strategic vision and religious authority. Eventually, through a combination of Imperial reinforcements, Yarrick's tactical acumen, and perhaps simple war weariness on the part of the Orcs, the invasion stalled. Ghazghkul made a decision that shocked many Orcs. He ordered a withdrawal. The Greenskins left Armageddon, loading onto their ships and departing the system. Some Orcs saw this as cowardice, but Ghazghkul's explanation was characteristically cunning for an Orc. Armageddon would wait. He had bigger plans, and he would return when the time was right. For 57 years, Ghazghkul rampaged across the galaxy, his fame growing with every victory, his following increasing as more and more Orcs were drawn to his crusade. Then, exactly as he had promised, he returned to Armageddon. The Second War for Armageddon made the first look like a minor skirmish by comparison. Ghazghkul brought billions of Orcs, a force so massive that it defied comprehension, and threw them at the planet with the intention of finishing what he had started decades before. This time, Yarrick was ready. The old commissar had spent those 57 years preparing Armageddon's defenses, creating fortifications and training soldiers specifically to fight Orcs, building a military force designed to counter Ghazghkul's specific threat. The resulting war was one of the largest conflicts in recent Imperial history, a grinding, brutal campaign that lasted for years and consumed millions of lives on both sides. Ghazghkul and Yarrick faced each other multiple times during this war, though never in direct single combat. Each sought to outmaneuver the other strategically, to strike at the opponent's plans and forces, rather than simply meeting in personal battle. The Orc war boss respected the human commissar enough to actually think about how to defeat him, rather than just trying to crush him through overwhelming force. Yarrick, in turn, studied Ghazghkul's tactics and psychology, looking for ways to frustrate the Greenskins' plans and undermine his authority. The war ended ambiguously, with neither side achieving total victory. Ghazghkul once again withdrew from Armageddon, but this time not because he had been defeated. Rather, he had become bored with the stalemate that had developed. The planet had become a quagmire, its defensive preparations so extensive that even Orc numbers and ferocity could not overcome them quickly. For a greenskin who believed he was destined to unite the entire Orc race and wage war on a galactic scale, spending years fighting over a single world, no matter how important, had lost its appeal. Since then, Ghazghkul has ranged across the galaxy, his legend growing with each passing year. His fame and the psychic energy generated by millions of Orcs believing in his divine mission have made him larger and more powerful than almost any Orc in recorded history. He stands as tall as some Imperial vehicles, his body a mass of muscle and bionics, his presence so overwhelming that even other orcs instinctively bow before him. Most remarkably, he survived an encounter that should have killed him permanently, a duel with Ragnar Blackmane, a space wolf space marine famous for his prowess in combat. Ragnar managed to decapitate Gazkul, separating the orc's head from his body in a blow that would end any normal being. But Gazkul is no normal being. Mad Doc Grotznik, who had saved him once before, saved him again, reattaching the head to a new, larger, more heavily augmented body. The warboss emerged from this experience even more formidable than before, his survival of what should have been certain death, adding to his legend and his followers' belief in his divine protection. Other legendary warbosses have risen and fallen throughout orc history. The Beast, who led the largest crusade in recorded history during the dark times of the Imperium's early millennia, united more orcs than any warboss before or since, and nearly destroyed the Imperium before finally being defeated. Nazdreg Ug Erdgrub, a Bad Moon's warboss of unusual intelligence and ambition, accumulated wealth beyond the dreams of most greenskins and commanded a space hulk that his mech boys had learned to control, allowing him to strike at targets throughout his region of space with terrifying mobility. These legendary figures share certain characteristics: exceptional size achieved through countless victories, unusual strategic vision for orcs, and the charisma necessary to command loyalty from greenskins, who would otherwise spend all their time fighting each other. They also share the ability to inspire belief in other orcs, to make their followers think that under this particular leader, they will achieve glories impossible under any other warboss. But even the greatest warboss is still an orc, still driven by the same basic instincts and desires that motivate the lowliest Yuf. Gazgakul wants to fight. The Beast wanted to fight. Every legendary warboss in history wanted to fight. They simply wanted to fight on a larger scale, against tougher opponents, in more spectacular campaigns. The religious visions, the strategic planning, the organization of massive crusades, these are all ultimately in service of the same goal: better and more glorious combat. This is perhaps the most terrifying thing about the legendary warbosses. They are not fundamentally different from other orcs. They are simply better at being what all orcs are: warriors who exist for combat and who will never stop seeking new battles to fight. Their genius, such as it is, lies in taking the basic orcish nature and expressing it on a larger stage, turning the individual greenskin's love of violence into campaigns that shake entire sectors of space. And always, somewhere in the galaxy, another potential legend is growing. Another youth is emerging from fungal growth with the genetic potential to become something extraordinary. Another boy is winning fights and growing larger and beginning to attract followers. Another warboss is uniting tribes and building momentum toward another great crusade. The cycle continues, endless and eternal, producing generation after generation of orc leaders who will leave their mark on the galaxy in blood and fire before being replaced by the next legendary greenskin to rise from obscurity to infamy. The endless cycle. To understand the true brutality of an orc's existence, one must step back and view not individual lives, but the larger pattern that encompasses the entire species. What emerges from this perspective is a picture of existence reduced to its most basic elements, stripped of everything except violence and the preparation for violence, extended across time without end or variation. An orc begins as a spore, grows into a warrior, fights until it grows large or dies trying, spends its entire existence in combat or preparing for combat, and finally falls in battle, releasing more spores to begin the cycle anew. There is no retirement, no peaceful old age, no quiet contemplation of a life well lived. There is only warfare, endless and eternal, with death simply being a transition point in the continuation of the species rather than an ending. This is brutal in ways that most species would find incomprehensible. Humans wage war but dream of peace. Eldar fight to preserve their dying civilization. Even the Tyranids, hive-minded and utterly alien, fight for survival and propagation. But orcs fight because that is what they do, because they were engineered for warfare, and their engineering was so complete that they cannot conceive of any other mode of existence. Yet to call this tragic would be to impose human values on a species that does not share them. Orcs are not sad about their violent existence. They do not wish for alternatives. They do not dream of peace or contemplate what their lives might be like if they were not genetically programmed for combat. The capacity for such thoughts was engineered out of them by the Old Ones, who created them as weapons in a war that ended millions of years ago. Instead, orcs are happy. Not in the complex human sense of happiness that involves multiple dimensions of satisfaction and fulfillment, but in the simple, direct sense of doing what one was made to do and enjoying it completely. An orc fighting in battle experiences genuine joy. An orc growing larger through successful combat feels real satisfaction. An orc leading its warband to victory knows authentic pride. These emotions are limited and focused entirely on warfare, but within their narrow scope, they are as real and meaningful as any more sophisticated feelings. This creates a strange kind of perfection in orc existence. They suffer, certainly, from wounds and defeats and the constant violence of their society, but they do not suffer from existential angst or unfulfilled desires or the gap between what they are and what they wish they could be. They are exactly what they were made to be, and they are content with that in a way that species capable of imagining alternatives rarely achieve. The brutality, then, is not in the violence itself, but in the totality of the violence, in the complete absence of anything else. An orc will never create art, never build something lasting, never love another being, never contemplate the stars and wonder about existence. Every moment of every day is consumed by warfare or preparation for warfare. Every relationship is based on dominance and hierarchy. Every achievement is measured solely by combat success. From a human perspective, this seems like a nightmare. Existence reduced to nothing but endless fighting. From an orc perspective, it is simply reality. And reality is good because it provides constant opportunities to do what orcs love most: fight. The brutality lies not in how orcs experience their lives, but in how limited those lives are when viewed from outside. How much they have been stripped away in service of making the perfect warrior. Yet this engineered simplicity is also what makes the orcs so dangerous. A species that can be reasoned with, can potentially be negotiated with or deterred. A species that fights for territory can be satisfied with concessions. A species that wages war for resources can potentially be traded with. Orcs can be none of these things. They fight because fighting is what they do, and nothing short of complete destruction will stop them, and even destruction will only scatter them temporarily until the spores grow into new warriors who will take up the fight where their predecessors left off. The great green tide rises and falls. Crusades surge across the galaxy and then fragment. Legendary war bosses unite millions and then die, and are replaced by other legendary war bosses who will unite millions more. The pattern repeats endlessly, has been repeating for millions of years, and will continue repeating for millions more, unless something changes fundamentally about the orc species or about the galaxy they inhabit. And through it all, individual orcs live their brutal, simple, violent lives. They emerge from spores, they fight, they grow, they fight more, they eventually die, and their spores ensure that new orcs will emerge to continue the cycle. Each individual life is a perfect miniature of the larger pattern, each greenskin recapitulating in their own existence the eternal warfare of their entire species. This is what it means to be an orc in the Warhammer 40,000 universe, to live a life so completely dedicated to violence that nothing else exists, to find in that violence a satisfaction so complete that nothing else is desired, and to participate in an endless cycle of warfare that has no beginning they can remember and no ending they can imagine. It is brutal, beyond the comprehension of species capable of peace, yet it is also perfect in its own terrible way, an existence stripped to its essential core and purified into something that cannot be corrupted, because there is nothing left to corrupt except the core itself. If you found this deep dive into orc existence fascinating, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. There are countless more aspects of the Warhammer 40,000 universe to explore. From the tragic nobility of the Space Marines, to the ancient terror of the Necrons, to the cosmic horror of the Tyranids. Each faction has its own story, its own brutal existence in the grim darkness of the far future. Thank you for listening to this exploration of what might be the most purely violent species in all of science fiction. May your own life contain considerably less fighting and considerably more peace than that of the average orc. Until next time, remember, in the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war, but at least most species aren't quite as enthusiastic about it as the greenskins.
I hope you guys enjoyed the story. Make sure to hit the subscribe, like, share button, whatever you want. Give me some feedback if there's any, and yeah, sleep well.